I was born in 1942 in Devon, which is now part of Fredericton North, 646 Union Street. Actually, I was born in the house. Yeah.
What is your best memory of childhood?
Oh. Well, we lived right on the river in Devon, and we used the river a lot in the wintertime because we played on the ice, we skated on the ice, and we often would cross the river on the ice, and so I guess living close to the river was kind of fun.
Do you have a worst childhood memory?
Well, it's vague, but probably my worst childhood memory was when my dad died, and I was only 5 years old. And actually one of my fondest memories is watching him come from work. He worked at the Apple Exchange on the south side, and he would cross the river, across the ice, and we would watch for him coming at supper time and run over to meet him.
Do you have a nickname?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get that nickname, and what is it?
I didn't have it then, but I got it. When you play sports, I think pretty well everybody gets a nickname, and most of the guys, if they didn't have a nickname, I gave them one, and I actually gave myself my nickname, which is Pud. It started out Puddinhead, because actually there was a baseball player at the time named Puddinhead Jones who played at Major League Baseball, and I thought, Puddinhead Parent, that sounds pretty good. So it was Puddinhead, then it shortened to Puddin, and then it became Pud, and I've lived with it ever since.
So obviously sports have played an impact in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I've said many times that if it weren't for sports, I probably would have been in jail, or I would have been in a lot of trouble, because I really like sports ever since I can remember. I played baseball, I played hockey, and later on I got into tennis, and I played a lot of sports, but hockey and baseball were a big part of my life all the way through.
So what are you proudest of in your life?
I'm proud of my kids. I have two boys. Both of them have done quite well. One is a dentist and one is a minister. And they both are really good dads, and they're great sons. So I think probably they're the biggest part of my life as far as any pride that I have.
Can you tell me about your career path?
When I was a kid, being crazy about sports, I thought I'd like to be a sportscaster. But then I realized that I didn't have very good voice for being to being on TV, or I guess back then it was radio. But that was one of the things that I always thought I might like to do. But then my mother thought, because I was pretty good in school, you'll get into that probably later, but thought I should be a teacher, and I thought she was crazy. I said, I don't want to be a teacher. But so when I finished high school, one of my buddies was taking engineering, so I thought, well, I'll enroll in engineering. That lasted about 4 months, and then I dropped out. So I worked for 7 years at NB Power, and it kept gnawing at me as to what I probably could or should do. And so I said one day to one of my supervisors that I've been thinking about going back to university. And he said, well, what would you take? And I said, I think I'd take physical education, because I like sports, and I like recreation, and I didn't know if I'd want to teach, but as it turned out, I enrolled just like that, on the spur of the moment. And so I had to give my supervisor 2 weeks notice, which I really couldn't, because I only had about 10 days before classes started. So I went back to university, and then I ended up teaching mostly physical education for 25 years. Then near the end of my teaching career, I got involved in real estate work, and So I was kind of burning the candle at both ends, I guess, in a sense. And so then when I retired from teaching, I'd already established myself as a realtor, and so I just stepped right into my second career.
Do you have any favorite stories as being a teacher?
I have a lot of great memories because I still run into kids almost daily that I taught back when. Some I don't recognize, but they recognize me. I enjoyed teaching for for most of my career. I got a little bit burnt a little bit near the end of my teaching career, but for the most part it was very rewarding. And I think probably I did have a little bit of a positive influence on a few kids.
Now that you're retired, what do you spend your time doing most days?
Well, to hear my wife tell it, I play golf all summer and I play bridge all winter. But well, that's partly true because I played golf this morning and I'll probably play bridge this evening. So, but I do a few other things, like we're involved in our church. I help out with a few things here around the building, and my wife and I are both work with the social committee and that sort of thing. But so we, and I travel a little bit, but I guess I'm not nearly as involved as I once was. Well, we went to Florida for about a month last winter. We also we went to Indiana. I have a sister in Indiana a year or 2 years ago. And we travel over to PEI 3 or 4 times a year, where our oldest son lives. And actually, we just came back from British Columbia about 3 weeks ago. We went out to visit our younger son and his family. And also, we stopped in Saskatchewan to visit some of our grandkids. So it was quite a trip, actually.
How many grandkids do you have?
We have 5 boys and 1 little girl. The 3 boys that live in Saskatchewan are all in their 20s. They're all grown up and they're working on their own. And I have 2 boys in Prince Edward Island, and then our little granddaughter lives in British Columbia.
Can you tell me about how religion has shaped you and your family?
I attended Sunday school as a kid, and probably after my dad died, I probably got away from that kind of thing. And then when we moved to Barker's Point, there were probably, I consider myself a mission field because I was a pretty bad pup. And I had several people that would, they invite us to church and that sort of thing. And we had, as a kid, I used to go to the church with different families. Like they'd invite me along, and but I guess I probably, when I met my wife, she was a Christian, and I wasn't. And I remember the minister talking about it in a sermon about being unequally yoked together, like a Christian and non-Christian. And I kind of thought, well, maybe I should become a Christian. So I went through the motions of becoming a Christian, and I really didn't change or anything. But then years later, when we were living in Nakawik, we had revival meetings, and we had an evangelist there. It just clicked. I've got to turn things around. Like I was still living like I always did, and I just kind of got converted right that night in 1974, actually, 1974, in Nakawik. So I've been a Christian ever since, and so we've been very active in our church. My wife and I, we spent a lot of time working with kids. We like the youth programs, and I was on deacon board, and we've had a lot of roles within the church, both of us, and so that's still a big part of our life. And also, I guess, related to the church, I've been quite involved with Green Hill Lake Camp, which is a Christian camp here just up in Millville area, where maybe 900 or 1,000 kids every summer go there.
So who do you think the biggest influence on your life has been?
Well, I mentioned earlier about losing my dad at 5. So we had a rough time. Mom, she had eight of us, and now on her own. And then 3 years later, we moved to Barker's Point, and some of them friends that I had, their dads were really great guys, and I'd say about 2 or 3 of the fathers, plus a couple of men that I had met through the church in Barker's Point, and a couple of prominent names. One prominent name that stood out for me was a guy by the name of Bill LaPointe, who was quite famous in Fredericton as a member of the Gospel Heirs. He was one of my Sunday school teachers, and he used to take us on outings, like we'd go sliding, we'd go skating and playing hockey on the pond and all kinds of stuff like that. And so he was one of the people in my life as a kid that really helped me probably stay out of trouble.
Do you have any regrets throughout your life?
Well, I've said at different times that one of the things that I do regret, and it's not a big thing, but I had a guitar when I was a kid. I used to sing a little bit when I used to participate in some of these country contests, that type of thing. But I never had a guitar. I never played guitar. But I bought a guitar. I can't even remember where I got it, or anyway. But I never learned to play it. I had it for a little while, and I traded it for a 22. And then I don't know whatever happened to the 22, but I never. And I've kind of kicked myself ever since, because I have a guitar now that I bought 25 years ago, and I still haven't learned to play it. But I think had I tried to learn as a kid, I probably would have done. I would have been able to play now, and I'd be. That's probably one of my biggest, maybe my biggest regret. And if I had to live my life over, I've got a number of pieces of memorabilia, but this one is kind of unique. As you can see, it's a baseball, and this is during playoff season. But I got this ball, as a foul ball in a spring training game in Florida. I tried to get some autographs, but we weren't able to. But as we were leaving the game, the umpire, big burly umpire, John McSherry, who was a famous umpire, he was walking through the parking lot, and I ran over to him and asked him for an autograph, and he said, he thought I was kind of nuts, he said, because people don't ask umpires for autographs. I said, yeah, but I'm an umpire too. And I said, I appreciate what you do. And so anyway, he signed it. That was the neat part. But then I think it was the very next year, I was sitting watching TV, opening game, and in Cincinnati, John McSherry was umpiring behind the plate. And in the first inning, he dropped dead. Dropped dead at home plate. And I thought, man, I bet I'm probably the only guy that's got his autograph on a baseball. And that was, I thought, a rather unique story. But another story, another baseball story I want to tell you about, it started out a long time ago, and it just finished up a couple of days ago. I played in the summer games in Halifax in 1969, so that would have been 49 years ago. And one of the most memorable people that I ran into at that tournament was the third baseman, and he was also a catcher from Quebec, by the name of Gilles Marat. He was an NHL hockey player, a defenseman, a really good hockey player. Anyway, and I talked to him quite often, so I got to know him. It seemed like I really had just met him, But anyway, that was 1969, and then a few days ago, I saw this name come through when I was working as a starter at the golf club, and I saw Lynn Marat, and I thought, well, that's not a neat name. I never heard. The only time I ever heard that name before was Jill Marat. So, and the guy said, well, that's my wife, and Jill Marat was her dad. And I said, really? You know, and so anyway, so then when she came, I told her that I played baseball against her dad 49 years ago, and I was kind of excited to meet his daughter, and she was excited to meet somebody that knew her dad, and it was kind of neat. We had quite a nice conversation, and she mentioned that her dad had passed away back in 2006, which was kind of I didn't know that, but anyway, that was kind of a neat story, I thought, because it took so long to develop from 49 years ago until today.
What do you know for sure?
I feel that if you don't tell any lies, then you don't have to remember what you said. And that's one of my things that I had a younger brother, and I loved him to death, and he died too young. He died 7 or 8 years ago, and we were very close. But he was notorious for telling fibs. You know, you couldn't believe anything he told you. And I mean, you usually knew that he was lying to you, but I always felt that telling the truth was very important, and I think that's probably why I'd have a hard time doing something wrong. Like even when I was a kid, if I did something wrong, I'd have to tell my mother that I did it, because my conscience would bother me, and I felt that so being honest about everything, then and I think this is more important even now, because I guess as you get older, your memory gets a little bit maybe not as good as it used to be. So I say, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said. Because if somebody tells you, well, you told me that, and I said, no, I didn't tell you that, because I know it's not true, so I didn't tell you. So.